Anybody there?
Well, I'm here, Tom.
Okay.
Look like I'm the only one.
You are the only one. You should know that, Nat.
Oh, my buddy over there.
Yeah.
Just to let you guys know, we are on YouTube Live right now, your audio and video.
Thank you.
So you be careful what you say, Eduardo.
And I'll also be careful what I do.
Well, they can't see what you're doing, but they can hear you.
Yeah, well, you know.
Mayor, your camera keeps
Now
going
they
in
can
and out
see.
of focus.
Are you going to get a break?
So, Councilmember Bates, I thank you for that photograph.
Oh, that was good memories, huh?
Yeah, and you always look good. I don't think I've ever seen a bad photo of you.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of those. Yeah, we sort of miss Big Jim. He was such a joy. I'll bring you up to date with our Shamata meeting. I asked Trina to bring you up to date with the Shamata meeting that we had Zoom with the delegations from Japan Friday.
On Friday.
It was a good meeting.
I don't think I heard about that.
I don't know, maybe she should have included you.
So this is Teresa. I'm just going to remind everyone we're on the air, and probably some of these conversations should be just between two council members or three.
Okay, thank you.
Keep us legal, Teresa.
We're about ready to go here, but I don't see anybody else. KCRT, can you? Oh, there you go. Okay.
We have a quorum. Well,
We
we
do.
have 1 minute left.
Yep. So, Madam Clerk, I've got 6:30.
Yes.
With that, I will call this meeting to order and ask you to call the roll, please.
Councilmember Bates,
Present.
Councilmember Jimenez,
Present.
Vice Mayor Johnson is absent. Councilmember Martinez,
Here,
Councilmember McLaughlin,
Here.
Councilmember Willis,
Here.
and Mayor Butt.
Here.
Next on the agenda, statement of conflict of interest. Are there any? Hearing none. Item C is agenda review. Are there any changes to the agenda? And hearing none. Item D is report from the city manager.
There is no report this evening.
We're moving to item E under budget session. So anyone that would like to speak on this item, please press the participants button. If you're viewing by video, if you're viewing by phone, well, if you're joining us by phone, press the star and the number 9 key. And Ursula, can you just repeat that information in Spanish, please?
Si desea dar comentarios sobre el tema de la agenda E1, por favor levante su mano ahora. Para comentar por computadora, seleccione la opción de participante en la parte de abajo de su pantalla y seleccione la opción que dice Raise Hand para levantar su mano. Para comentar por teléfono, oprima estrella 9. Gracias.
Item E1 is to receive a presentation and provide feedback on budget guidelines and the budget development process.
Okay, is there any staff introduction or input to this, or should we just jump into it? City manager, you, Councilmember McLaughlin?
Yeah, I was the one who asked for this meeting, and thank you to all of my colleagues, all of us on the city council for being willing to have this special meeting. I just want to say just a few sentences. And then as far as I'm concerned, we could get into the presentation. But I just want to say the purpose of this is so we can give due attention to our concerns about budgeting policies, reserve policies, fiscal sustainability, debt management, etc. And our budget should reflect our values and our desires to improve the lives of our residents. So Lift Up Richmond has put together a great presentation, which I believe dovetails with the City Council's values and understanding of our role as representatives of the public to address the needs of the public in both good times and bad times. I believe they used Management Partners' proposal as a launching pad and also addressed the need for City Council and the mayor to be involved collaboratively with city staff and organizations representing residents throughout the city. So this is an opportunity for us all to clarify some great policies as we move forward in a very transparent way for all to see and appreciate our approach to serving well our residents with city resources. So thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, anybody else want to have any introductory remarks before we jump into it? Okay, I don't see any, so let's entertain the Lift Up Richmond presentation.
Hi, good evening. So I think I'm going to start us off by just doing a quick introduction, and then Lisa is going to get into some of the detail of Lift Up Richmond's proposal. But to start with, I wanted to just talk about what Lift Up Richmond is, because I thought that might be, we thought that might be helpful as a starting point. So I think, Lisa, could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So Lift Up Richmond is a coalition of community groups in Richmond, folks who work for the city, the labor unions, SEIU 10-1 and IFPT Local 21. My name is Kristen Schumacher. I work for IFPT Local 21. We represent employees at the city, and it also includes residents who are concerned about investing in services for the city of Richmond. That is who we are. That is why we're here tonight. Lisa, could you go to the next slide? Thank you. And just in summary, our guiding principles in coming up with our own thoughts on what the city's budgeting process could look like and what a set of good budget policies could look like is that the budget process should first and foremost be democratic, it should be transparent, and it should be something that city residents can participate in and have a clear avenue to do so. It also should balance the need for sound fiscal management, which includes managing the city's long-term liabilities, building and maintaining reserves, but balancing that with the community's need for services, which especially right now, given everything that's going on with the pandemic, there is a very immediate and dire need for city services. Also, that when residents approve new taxes like they did last year, like they did back in 2018 with the documentary transfer tax, those taxes need to be budgeted in a transparent way for the ongoing services that voters approved. And then finally, we believe that through using revenue development strategies, through transparent and data-driven budgeting, and also using smart policies that we borrow from other cities on debt service, clear guidelines on how to build and how to use reserves if we need to, we can have both a fiscally sustainable budget policy and also vibrant and well-funded city services at the same time. This is not an either-or conversation. We can have sound fiscal management and quality public services as well. You want to go to the next one, Lisa? So I just wanted to highlight some of our bigger concerns with Management Partners' proposal, and then Lisa will get into the details on this. But one of the bigger ones is that there was language in there that restricts spending reserves below 10%, and also requires that we would explore budget balancing strategies up to and including service cuts, rather than ever expecting to use any portion of the 17% reserve that the policy would require. And really why that's a concern is because it doesn't set clear standards for when we could use reserves if we had to protect services, rather than always prioritizing maintaining reserves. And also there's a lack of transparency there if we're building reserves, but yet we will never spend the majority of them, a huge portion of them, even if we have a catastrophic situation that might come up in the future. It also doesn't lay out any sort of transparent process for budgeting the documentary transfer tax, which was approved by a significant majority of Richmond voters. It creates some unclear authority for how changes could be made to the budget without coming to council. And we just believe that needs to be clarified in more detail so that we're avoiding any concerns with transparency and how resources are allocated. And it also doesn't lay out a clear path for residents to participate in the budgeting process. Other cities do some of these things in clearer ways in their budget policies. So we're excited to present some best practices that we think would be more ideal for Richmond. Next slide, please. All right, so I think I'll hand it over to Lisa then.
All right. Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, Lisa.
Okay, great, thank you. So we've already introduced what Lift Up Richmond is, so I'll move on to the next slide. So we wanted to start with, so this entire presentation is going to have management partners' proposals juxtaposed next to what Lift Up Richmond is proposing. If any of the proposals on the Lift Up Richmond proposal are underlined, that means that we use the management partners proposal as a springboard and just added some, edited the language slightly. If the proposals are in blue font, that means that they're entirely new and basically a complete break proposed. So I can't, in the amount of time we have, we certainly can't read through and enumerate every single one of these policies in detail, but we welcome questions at the end of the presentation for debate and discussion with some of the more details. So this will have to be, just by necessity, a summary presentation of the policies. So in general, we already Kristen already brought up the fact that we did not agree with the way in which these policies were developed. We felt like the budget policies and the budget in general should be developed collaboratively with input from the city manager, the mayor, council, and organizations representing residents. All with minor exceptions, which are clearly defined in budget policy. We feel that representatives should have a central role in budgetary decisions, such as making budget cuts or more funding for certain departments. Nonetheless, we do agree that city council should not require oversight of extremely minor adjustments, that the goal is to balance between transparency and letting residents witness budget adjustments in a public forum and efficiency, allowing the city manager to perform her work. We anticipate that the city manager actually will welcome these clarifications, as it will enable her to do her important work free from ambiguity. So there's a number of slides, actually the next two slides, that will deal specifically with reserve policies. The reserves, of course, are basically important, obviously, for city to have, and they can be roughly thought of as a savings account for the budget. And the standard, of course, is to have roughly 2 months of reserves. The purpose is then should be determined by policy. In other words, what is Richmond saving money for? And we feel it's important to strike the right balance between reserves and the immediate needs of the city. Lift Up Richmond proposes keeping the reserve levels at 15% versus the 17% presented by management partners. And our reasoning is really that there's nothing stopping the city from continuing to fund a reserve beyond the established 15% threshold. The reserves there are specifically there to continue funding services in times of crisis. Reserves should be used before service and infrastructure maintenance cuts are made. In this scenario, we certainly agree that beginning new infrastructure projects would typically not justify the use of reserves. So we generally agree with the policies in these areas, with the risk management for internal service funds and for the reserves for the equipment funds, internal service funds. But we do feel that it should be rather a goal to have a operating reserve of 10% rather than an actual requirement. And we also feel that the 10% reserve should not supersede the budgetary needs of providing services and workforce needs. So although we agree in general with the policies put forward, we just felt that it was important to specify a goal of 10% rather than a mandate to allow more flexibility. Similarly, we agree in theory with, obviously, enterprise funds. It would be wonderful to have a reserve in all of your enterprise funds. However, up until recently, there were still negative fund balances in some of your enterprise funds and loans from the general fund. So at this point, we felt like it was more important to have a flexible policy where fund administrators actually determine for the fund itself what the unique risks are to that fund and the unique characteristics of that enterprise fund, and establish reserves based on those characteristics and leave that up to the administrators to understand the specifics and to have a goal of establishing a target minimum level, but not have the same sort of percentage for every enterprise fund. It's not a one size fits all policy, in our opinion. So in general, we feel that we totally agree that ongoing revenues, should fund ongoing expenditures. That's a structurally balanced way to budget. However, in general, there are conditions and situations where we feel that you need to have the flexibility to occasionally use a one-time windfall or one-time non-recurring revenue for an ongoing expenditure, because it's not a perfect world, and there are emergencies, and there are COVID, and there are situations where there may be situations that mandate the use in that way. Do we believe that it should be a regular practice, best practice? No. Do we believe there should be some flexibility? Yes. Also, we also feel it's important to enumerate that capital asset acquisitions are not recurring expenditures. So that those are not included in a recurring expenditure sort of operating budget. We are obviously in agreement that enterprise funds should be completely 100%, self-supporting. However, we feel there must be some sort of disconnect in Richmond with enterprise funds, because in general, like I said, there have been negative fund balances, and there may need to be a more frequent review of fee structures, charges for services, and sort of a review of operating revenues and expenditures. We do feel that the general fund does subsidize the enterprise funds in some cases, and in some cases to a large extent, and that suggests there's a disconnect between either the fees that are being charged or perhaps the fees are not being collected, that there's a collection issue. Perhaps tenants are not being pressured and or to pay their bills. There's a disconnect somewhere. And so clearly the enterprise funds cannot be subsidized on an ongoing basis. Therefore, we agree with the policy as put forward by management partners. We just felt it needed to have a little more detail and be a little more specific. Obviously, any subsidies or how the general fund is reimbursed by the enterprise fund obviously needs to be detailed in the budget and something the council approves. I'm not really sure. We weren't really sure what to do with management partners' proposal about earmarking. In general fund money that comes into the general fund, as well as general fund money that's transferred to other funds, must always have some sort of purpose or process by which it's designated. In other words, within the general fund, if the general fund should only be the only fund in the entire city that has a positive unassigned balance. That's GADSB 54, which is the General Government Accounting Standards Board. You should not have positive unassigned fund balances in any of your other funds. So basically, if money is transferred to another fund, whether it's an internal service fund or some sort of special fund, it needs to be designated as either restricted, committed, or assigned. That's done through the level of authority determines whether it's committed. If it's committed, it's by a vote of council. If it's assigned, it could be by a designated authority like the city manager. If it's unassigned, it needs to go into a reserve account. It needs to be designated as reserve if that's what the goal of council is. It just can't be unassigned money sitting in a fund waiting to be spent based on, basically with no designation. And these are strictly laid out in the Government Accounting Standards Board. This is not coming from Up Richmond. And the unencumbered balances, we have a fairly large disagreement with the city about the use of what happens to encumbrances at the end of the year. But basically, if you do have unencumbered money from prior years, it should be carefully scrutinized and limited to being used generally for non-reoccurring expenditures. That doesn't from being used for reoccurring But we do agree in general that, again, any sort of one-time monies should be used for primarily non-recurring expenditures. We do not agree that the documentary transfer tax is solely a one-time windfall or non-recurring revenue. We actually believe and have been told by finance staff that there is a regular sort of expected amount every year, which at the moment is 6 million. That baseline actually may change to 8 million, but that there is a portion of that tax that is expected regularly and counted on by the city as reoccurring. Anything over that amount perhaps could be considered a non-recurring resource. And government accounting standards all specify that some revenue sources are both. They provide both sorts of revenue. We believe that the city should base a baseline on a mean from the moment that tax was increased by voters in November 2018 until the present, to calculate a mean baseline below which everything would be reoccurring and above which would be considered non-reoccurring. And we believe that the city should have a dynamic process through which they determine what that annual mean is and calculate it with new data every year. So we made an effort to specify how to use that money, anything above, in other words, money that is above what's expected or non-recurring. We felt like the excess, if there is, should be used towards the goal of making sure that the Kids First initiative has been fully funded. And we want to be clear here, we can't mandate money be used for fully funding the Kids First because the documentary transfer tax was a general tax. So we may have to alter the language here slightly not to mandate that, which I believe would not be legal. But that if that Kids First initiative is paid off, then we would go next to putting 20% of that excess towards the reserve until it equals the 15% policy. Another 20% of the excess would be used to fund unfunded liabilities or negative fund balances. And the remainder would be used to fund any unmet needs for the city that haven't been met. That would be a 40%. We will acknowledge that that means that some portion of this non-reoccurring revenue is being used for reoccurring expenses. This would be one case where we feel like that would be useful and flexibility is required if the city encountered a very, very large windfall, document transfer tax, say $10 to $15 million in 1 year, and you have some portion like 5 million of that is considered non-recurring. That would be a nice chunk to pay down part of your unfunded liability, also to put in reserve or to pay off your negative fund balances. So we do, again, this is where we feel that some flexibility in using non-reoccurring resources or revenues would be sometimes permitted to pay ongoing expenditures. We essentially don't disagree with management partners' views on capital projects. We just feel that the city council to determine how to prioritize those projects. Obviously, these projects should be considered with long-term plans in mind, considering all capital projects at the same time. In other words, not tackling them individually, but sort of having a wider view of the city's capital needs. A, to secure funding, B, to plan the budget, and C, to prevent project pileup. And we just, again, agree in theory, but feel that the prioritization system should be determined by council. Okay, in terms of fiscal sustainability, we feel very strongly that service level and work reductions cannot be adopted by city council until all other sources of funds, including reserves and other fund balances, have been considered to cover budget caps. So rather than actually having service level reductions be something that goes first prior to reserves, in order to maintain reserves, we believe that you have to actually provide city services, which is the role of government. And in order to do so, you need to consider, especially in cases of emergencies, that reserves might be needed in order to maintain those. So, and in terms of the long range forecast, we disagree in theory a great deal as to how the city defines a structural gap. So we stayed away from that definition or even debating that definition, but generally just talked about the fact that, financial forecasts make sense to do them, at least over a 4-year period, that there's an annual development budget process. The city already has a great deal of or some policies that define how the budget process moves forward, but that you really use historical data, actual data to inform your budget process. And these are just basic good best practices policies in that bullet point number 2. But our major point of disagreement is that service level reductions will not be had for the cost of like preserving the reserve in situations where there are financial situations that are detrimental, either due to emergencies, natural, COVID, whatever you want to say, whatever financial problem you're in. So again, a whole issue here about what a structural gap in the budget is or in financial planning. So again, we just stuck with general good policies about how you plan multi-year projects, making sure that you have money to pay for future year expenses on those projects, that every aspect of those projects is considered when deciding whether to start those projects. We feel it's really important to understand that the city needs to pursue every federal, state, and private grant that they can find to support their programs, that the city council should determine whether those programs are augmented or just supplanting funding, and that how those programs will continue if the grant money is no longer there. In other words, making sure that there's a match, or that how can the city maintain that service if the grant is terminated. And of course, the city will continually seek revenues. This is one of the greatest parts of the city, is that this new tax that is going to take place, the gross receipts tax, which is going to take effect in 2022, and the documentary transfer tax, which has proved to be incredibly lucrative for the city. All of which were brought into effect by lobbying the public extensively, by labor unions, by their members walking the streets, pounding the pavement, by community groups pounding the pavement, going door to door, asking for public input, informing people, educating people in order to get those passed on the ballot. We do not understand at all in terms of debt management why management partners would outlaw the use of short-term debt. Short-term debt is incredibly effective. The TRANS, which is the tax and revenue anticipation notes, it's short-term. You repay it in the same year. It's used when you're anticipating revenue that isn't there yet, that's going to be there. Not only does it have the benefit of aiding in cash flow, but it actually often will allow you to pay down some of your long-term liabilities, such as your CalPERS payments, at a discount, and therefore actually fiduciarily makes sense for the city to pay those early and get that discount, as long as that discount offsets the cost of issuing the notes. So again, we don't really understand why management partners would propose that. Many cities use tax and revenue anticipation notes in their yearly policies, and they actually benefit greatly financially from it. We don't disagree with any of the capital lease language and or the long-term borrowing language, so we adopted those straight from management partners. This is where we also differ a great deal on the city's use of swaps. We feel that the city should no longer be permitted to use interest rate swaps when issuing debt. The city, I think no one would argue reasonably that the city's done well in these swaps. You're about to pay a $33 million termination fee. You've paid termination fees in the past. The city was downgraded. As a result of that downgrade, you had these termination fees. You probably had interest rate problems. You probably have letter credit problems. And most cities suffered huge losses from interest rate swaps. The city of Los Angeles has just put through a policy to eliminate the use of swaps. They had 2 very detrimental swaps back in 2003, 2006, one of which they're still paying a great deal on, just like Richmond. So we do not believe swaps are a long-term fiscally smart policy. And the other sort of the other two bullet points here just talk about making sure that obviously refundings save money, that the amount of money that's going to be saved makes sense, that it's enough to justify going through the refunding transaction, that refunding is something that that staff, thinks about and reevaluates on a regular basis to see if there are bonds that need to be refinanced for substantial savings, and that that those savings costs and just all the options are presented with numbers and actual presentation of costs and benefits in the presentation to council. And that also that we feel the city should consider the use of variable rate debt, consider use, not necessarily determine to use that, but that it should be one part of the arsenal that the city considers when it's issuing debt. And finally, in terms of private developers, we use some of management partners' proposal, but in general, we don't feel that there's something called a fair share. Or if a developer has a development, they own the land, they're going to be developing for profit, commercial or residential or industrial properties, we believe they need to pay all their contractual obligations for capital or other improvements, whatever those improvements are, that there is no public money that should subsidize such improvements. And even if there aren't specific obligations named in the contract, we don't believe that any public money should subsidize private development. And so whether that means, not providing a discount for them to then develop something later, in general, like public funds should not subsidize private corporate development of taxpayer land. And in general, we feel the city, I don't see a policy like this in the city's budgeting processes, but in general, we have had some trouble looking to see in what funds you have unassigned balances. And we believe that you should follow the government accounting standards, which is if you have general fund money in other funds, it should be labeled as part of the unassigned fund balance and given the due to the general fund or due from the general fund in budget report. And that's just part of Gadsby Rule 54. The other matters, this is not something management partners touched on at all, but the city of Richmond has an encumbrance policy in which year-end money not spent in encumbrance is rolled over from year to year. And these policies define very specifically how encumbrances should be treated. In our opinion, for best practices, it does allow departments to unencumber funds in 1 year. But overall, the biggest difference I would say between this policy and the city's current policy is that at the end of the year, funds that are encumbered that haven't been spent have to go back to the fund in which they originated from. And if they are originating from the general fund, they go back to the unassigned fund balance. The only exception to that rule is if you are, obviously, if there's an outstanding contract that's being paid for, but if there's money that's encumbered that's just sitting there, that there's no outstanding contract, there's no RFP, there's no designated, sort of project in the works, then that money needs to be returned and reallocated if necessary to fund the project. And obviously, these decisions would go in front of council to be reallocated. And finally, the last sort of issue relates to public input. We believe that, again, this process should be democratic and inclusive, and therefore, we understand the city does have some sort of survey that's developed. This is a little bit more detail, stating that the survey would either be conducted by a professional service, but that it has to be a valid sample of residents, statistically relevant number of residents, that it has in terms of race, income, neighborhood, age, profession, family size, home ownership, rentership, that it needs to be, the content needs to be approved by city council prior to release. If the city can afford a professional survey, then an informal survey will be made, but that the way in which the public has access has to be assured, like it has to be given, flyers have to be given out and made publicly available in city libraries, recreation centers, senior centers. In other words, it has to be disseminated as many publicly available channels as possible, and that those results need to be made public within a certain amount of time from receiving the results, and that information has to be shared publicly. And we feel that this is an important way for the city to get the kind of feedback from residents of Richmond about what they need and what services they are most drastically needed in the city. And so with that concludes our presentation. We would be happy to answer any specific questions about any of the individual policies. Again, this was way too much information to cover in detail for every slide. Thank you for allowing us to present.
Are there any questions from council members?
Yeah.
Councilmember Jimenez.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. I really appreciate all the work that lived at Richmond, which is part of the city. You like is not just outside. It's people working in the city, people living in the city, organizations that are organizing in the city. Can you, when you talk about the swaps, could you leverage a little bit more about why the city should stop using swaps?
Yeah, so the issue in my mind about swaps is that when it comes down to it, you can't refinance your debt. So with fixed rate bonds, you can generally refinance your debt with a 10-year, after 10 years has elapsed on the bonds. With variable rate debt, you can actually refinance. Most standard language in variable rate debt is refinance within 30 days. So yes, variable rate debt is subject to exposure to rate or interest rate spikes, but with a 30-day provision, you can get out of that debt. Start my video. Oh, okay. So, okay, sorry, let me start my video. The administrator asked me to.
Your video's there.
Okay, all right. So the idea is that, so basically what happens with swaps is basically the city is not able to refinance when interest rates become more favorable. So for example, with the financial crisis, interest rates, LIBOR, the Fed rate went down to almost zero for actually it stayed zero for quite some time, or at least close to zero. But the city was paying at least 5+ percentage point on its swap. And actually it turns out currently you're paying even more than that. So you're not even getting the synthetic rate that you were promised. You're paying more than your synthetic rate because the swap's not functioning as it was promised at this point. The two indexes aren't matching. So the bottom line is swaps in general, most cities and banks in cities have often been linked to counterparty payments on swaps. Detroit went bankrupt because of counterparty payments on swaps. The entire country of Puerto Rico went bankrupt because of swaps. Jefferson City, Alabama, the sewer system went bankrupt because of swaps. The Chicago education system went virtually bankrupt because of swaps. So to say that, and to be honest, in the private sector, no one issues swaps for over 5 to 7 years because they're not meant to be long-term financial instruments. These swaps were designed by underwriters who knew the risk. They knew that the risk would always be in favor of the banks, in favor of their own institutions. They specialize in risk. That's what they do. And to be honest, you know, a lot of these groups were found to be sort of negligent in providing all the detail that they needed to provide with cities when they entered into these swaps, so that the finance staff were actually unaware of the risk. Finance staff were not informed of the risks by, sometimes even by their financial advisors. So a lot of the reforms in the financial crisis related to when financial advisors have a fiduciary responsibility to their municipality. In fact, that is their duty, and it's not to an underwriter, and it's to anyone who proposes the debt and brings it in. So again, there's swaps are just in general a losing battle for municipalities.
Thank you. And I just heard like, so you mentioned that Los Angeles was in this swap. Could you tell us like who was the financial advisor there?
Yeah, the financial advisor for the swaps there was Public Resources Advisory Group. And they actually were intimately involved, I believe, at least in the 2006 swap. I do believe in the 2003 swap. Actually, I think Public Resources Advisory Group has been a longstanding advisor to the city of Los Angeles, and particularly on the swaps.
And are they the same like we have right now, or are they like?
Yes, they are the same advisor you have right now, correct. In fact, I've actually been in a room with Ms. Mortensen debating the uses of swaps in LA in prior meetings. So we actually were able to finally get the city of Los Angeles to admit in a hearing that they should never have entered into swaps, not just in retrospect, not just looking back, but that at the time, swaps were not a good idea, that they regret it. They've tried years and years to refinance and get out of their swaps with no success. They're still paying on their swaps. And the fact is that the second largest city in the United States has decided to basically stop permitting the use of interest rate swaps in their debt policy going forward. And so, you know, again, there were a number of advisors that are similar to within Public Resources Advisor Group that are also advised the city of Berkeley.
Okay, thank you. And my last question, and it's all about the debt management. You meant, like, what I saw was that we usually had like fixed rate bonds or debt, yes. And you mentioned here something around other, like, variable, I believe.
Variable rate. Mm-hmm.
Variable rate. Can you talk a little bit about, like, explain the difference and why, like, some cities decided to go with both or just one?
Right. Yeah, it really depends on the city and their capacity, in my opinion. So, like, the city of Los Angeles, debt management person in the city of Los Angeles didn't feel it was safe to issue very out swap, and ended up suffering a great deal under the swap scenario. But for example, the Department of Water and Power in the city of Los Angeles issues variable rate debt all the time with no swaps, and is paying, you know, paid throughout the years of the recession, 0 interest rate on their bonds. So for $300 million to $400 million in bonds, they're paying almost no interest because the rate is being held so low. And the same would be true at this point because the rate is being held so low by the federal government. So, you know, variable rate debt is an option. Not everybody feels comfortable with the level of risk. Just felt it was important to bring it up as another option. Variable rate debt would require acting very quickly. If interest rates spike, it would require the debt finance staff to, you know, go to the market and, you know, basically try to refinance into fixed rate bonds. And that can take time. That can take, you know, substantial planning. So it's possible that smaller cities with fewer finance staff, cities with like less people devoted to the actual debt management would have a hard time doing variable rate debt because of the option of having to sort of refinance on a moment's notice if interest rates start to increase dramatically.
Thank you. I just,
you know, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that what, like, as we had the discussion last time, this is also about transparency, that people clear that have the right to participate, and that we also keep services and not go into scarcity policies in a way when we know that our community needs services and needs the support. So thank you for the explanation, and I will let my other council members to ask questions.
Are there any other questions from council members? I don't see any, so let's go to the second part of this presentation, which is Councilmember Bates, you have one.
You're muted, Nat.
Unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm sorry. I understand as the group that was alluded to in the presentation spoke about transparency, and as a council, we should include other citizens. And my question is, other than a group that is associated with this presentation, were there other citizens that were involved or invited to share their viewpoints?
Well, that's what public comments for, and that's why the agenda was posted early. So we view that the residents, there's a rather large representation of residents of Richmond in Lift Up Richmond. And we also represent the employees of the city. And we actually presented policies, generic policies, and summarized these for our members. So it was clear that they could call in and understand these policies, reached out to our members as well, hoping that they would be able to make comments. These are fairly detailed, very complicated issues. They're difficult for most people who don't do budgeting to understand. So yes, I mean, and again, this is the whole point of having a public hearing, is to have on what these policies are about. So I guess the very nature of having a public hearing invites, we would think, transparency, and invites other members of the public to comment.
Okay, the other question is that my analysis of budgetary practices should definitely include revenue streams. And I looked at your presentation and I saw nothing other than taxing the community for generating revenue. There's not a business proposal. We're about to lose Walmart to Pinot and Kmart. We have two major projects, housing, that's supposed to generate millions of dollars. We are sort of anti-business community where we're losing businesses to Pinot, Hercules, and thereabouts. But I don't see, and I haven't heard anything, how do we collectively as a group, and your particular group in general, how do we work together to turn around the climate of an exodus of businesses from Richmond? And you know, part of it has to do with the Measure U. And we, like I said, we got the Zeneca project, we have the Port Melody. I don't think any of this organization are even supportive of that. And that's a large stream of revenue. Tell me how we're gonna create a climate of revenue generating in this city if we are not working collectively together to bring forward some of these nice projects.
So thank you for your question. And we would agree that it's really important to figure out new streams of revenue for the city. And I believe that the proposal at the very end of this slide states the city will continuously seek new revenues and pursue a diverse revenue base in order to limit the impact to the city from short-term fluctuations in any one revenue source. I would agree that this is a fundamental aspect of balancing a city's budget, is thinking about new revenue streams. To say that the unions and the group that you're talking about now participated in looking at new revenue streams is to ignore the fact that they were the boots on the ground that allowed the city of Richmond to pass the documentary transfer tax and the gross receipts tax. And the fact is that's going to bring in anywhere from 6 to 8 million in new revenue every year for the documentary transfer tax, and the gross receipts tax is estimated to bring in another 6 million. You're talking upwards of 14 to 15 million dollars every year in new revenue that was generated through the efforts of your employees who were members of labor unions, the labor union staff, the community groups that you're now talking about in Lift Up Richmond, who were primarily responsible for getting that measure passed. So to state that it's that we're not actively working towards developing new revenue streams, I'm not sure that's a fair judgment, but I would agree with you that we need to work with you collaboratively to figure out ways to stimulate development that's sustainable, that's fundamentally ecologically sustainable, that's fair to the residents in an economic and class divisions, that the types of projects the city considers work for everyone, not just for the developers, not just for the Chevrons of the world, but it works for the people of the city of Richmond. And I believe we are totally willing and engaged to work with you and the other council members in an ongoing collaborative process. I don't know that invitation has ever been made for us to work with you collaboratively. That's never put out there. But we appreciate that invitation, and we would love to take you on it.
Well, at some point, we're going to have to do an analysis. While we may be getting taxes from certain groups, we're also losing the mom and pops and a lot of small businesses that, as I indicated, leaving the city and going elsewhere. So down the road, this so-called bonus that you think you're going to get in sales tax and all of that may be a lot less than you anticipate. So that's for staff to evaluate
we're not
as
anticipating
we
it.
move forward.
Okay. Well, and also, I'm not sure our businesses, I don't know how the gross receipts tax hasn't even been implemented yet. So aren't losing any money at this point. So if, and that tax was approved by 73% of Richmond voters. So again, we're just discussing a tax that was approved by the citizens of Richmond with an ultimate majority of voters. And, again, we don't determine like once it's voted for, and clearly the residents of Richmond wanted it. And if you are worried about businesses leaving, I don't know how they could be leaving and losing revenue yet, because the revenue hasn't even been implemented. It's not even going to be elected in 2022. If you're saying they're preemptively leaving the city, I'd certainly want to see data that supports that. Overall, tax.
Well,
given
Walmart subsidy leave, that's about almost $500,000 or thereabouts. They're getting ready to take off, and I don't know what the reason that they're leaving, except that that's going to be a dent in the revenue to the city's coffers. But anyway, that's all I have, Mr. Mayor. I'm finished, Tom.
We have public speakers.
Mayor,
Sorry,
you've been muted. There you go.
I was muted and I didn't realize it. So the second part of this presentation, I understand, is to revisit the city manager's presentation on this subject. Is that something you want to go ahead with, city manager?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay.
So they're going to help bring up that just a couple of slides that we'll walk through. And we really I wanted to just kind of start with the philosophy as to what we were thinking about originally in this process. So I'm hoping those slides come up fairly shortly. Super. Here. And so we can just go ahead to the next one. And just as a reminder, originally, and we've changed some language here already because of some concerns that we had heard, the draft budgeting guiding principles or guidelines or priorities, we could be called a whole bunch of different things, were initially just a draft for consideration. And they did come from our existing city policies, as well as best practices used by other local governments who are in financially stable situations, have structurally balanced budget, long-term fiscal sustainability, that type of thing. And the goals really were to increase the transparency in the budgeting process. And to provide just kind of general parameters. I would call them a framework or some bumpers in big picture. we really wanted to have some aspirational goals. So acknowledging that they were aspirational. For instance, even with our current debt policy, our reserve policy, we've never met in the past few years. We haven't met that policy even as it is now. We've also already included expenditures in the current year budget. So we are using our reserves to be able to balance this year's budget. And it was really trying to see if there was going to be some helpful decision-making parameters for City Council to use. We know that we're going to have some tough budgets coming up still, and having council having a framework and be able to have conversations, have evaluation tools to try and talk about those trade-offs. We were hoping was going to be helpful for council to have conversations with the community as you all make decisions about the budget going forward, and about why certain things may or may not fit in the budget. It was really never intended to be the budget. And I'm concerned that there was some thinking that this was sort of setting exactly what was going to be there. I mean, there weren't things about programs, and there weren't things about, you know, specific things. And so we did have, and we'll go through the next two slides, we'll just kind of remind you that there were 8 different categories. There were some principles, you've seen them already. So if we go through the next 2 slides, that one, they're here if we need to refer back to them, but we're going to go on to the next slide, and then the next slide yet again. So we spent some time reflecting on what we heard from council last week. And I think there's probably a better way of addressing this whole thing. Because I don't want this to kind of hijack, you know, whole budget process. So I was hearing questions about this definitions of words. I was hearing questions about the language you're using and the goals and intent of the whole exercise. We were hearing interest in wanting to talk more about our values. A lot of, you know, some comments about, you know, the budget is value-based, is value-driven. And I don't think that's even been reflected yet in anything you've heard last week or this week so far. And so we haven't looked in years, I understand, at the city's mission, vision, and values. A classic budget process would start with those basics. So there's a lot that has been suggested that would be really easy to incorporate if we really wanted to get very granular in this process. And so specific to this initial draft of budget guidelines, while it would be easy to incorporate, you know, some of it, I think it's really obvious that we still need to have a lot more discussion about process and about these in particular. And again, there's not exactly, maybe we haven't provided the right context for you all. We haven't, you haven't been able to hear the status of the forecast. We haven't been able to even ask and do a check-in if long-term fiscal sustainability, how much of a value that is to the council. There's some specific concerns with some of the recommendations about consistency with our charter, how prescriptive it may be that would actually take away some of your authority and your flexibility for how you'd want to do budget decisions over time. You know, Los Angeles, which is where a lot of this came from, I can't imagine you'd want to adopt just something mostly from them in terms of the fact that it's such a different community and that we'd want to spend some time crafting things that were specifically for Richmond. So it would seem to make sense to me to actually kind of defer this, tie it into a broader vision, and meet with all of the stakeholders to craft something appropriate for Richmond. There was also some specific things in there that were more about how to do a budget process rather than guiding policy, you know, than sort of the parameters or the bumpers or the framework. So I'd really suggest that we embark on a process that starts with mission, vision, and values, but understanding that we couldn't complete that process. It wouldn't coincide directly or dovetail specifically with this year's budget, and including because we're not staffed to do something like that at this point. But it could be a process that we could start with some outside help in September and include, you know, a lot of community engagement and conclude that process for those results to be folded into an annual goal setting process that ties to the budget process for fiscal year 22-23. It would also allow time for consideration and analysis of different budget options that might put us on a path towards fiscal sustainability that no one, including me, have even been able to review yet. So in the meantime, though, and of course, we still need to adopt a fiscal year 21-22 budget. And LaShonda is actually going to share with you what the calendar would look like for our traditional budget process and ask for some feedback to see if there's any improvements you'd like to make for this year. It won't be everything that everybody wants given timing and staffing, but we've already made some modifications based on initial council feedback, and we want to meet your interests in the process as much as possible. So with that, I'm going to ask that we go to the next slide and that LaShonda walk us through some of the specifics about the budget process.
Thank you, Laura. Good evening, Council. Good evening, Mayor. LaShonda White, Deputy City Manager. So as Laura stated, I will be providing a high-level overview of the fiscal year 21-22 proposed budget process. So every year, the city staff develop a timeline for how we're going to implement the budget. We share that with staff and with council. And so I really just want to share that with you so you can see where there are points of, so we can be very transparent, and that you can see where there's points for collaboration and input and feedback within the next 4 months. So starting with March, last week, we presented some proposed budget principles for consideration. We're here tonight having further conversation about that and also really talking about the budget development process. We will, in 2 weeks, you'll hear from staff again. Management partners will be back to talk about the 10-year forecast model and also looking at this new dashboard model that we want to present to City Council. So giving you a sense of where we are financially and what that long-term fiscal sustainability can look like for the city of Richmond. We'll also hear from city staff about where we are for the fiscal year 2021 budget process. So I think it really is important in terms of getting our monthly updates. We want to continue to provide those to City Council where we can talk about where we are now and how that really is preparing us for next fiscal year in the budget development process. And we'll also just have an opportunity, that's another point for community council, other stakeholders to provide some information, input, feedback to us on the development process for the fiscal year 2022 budget or 21-22 budget process. Then every month we have, and this is, I think will be our third or fourth meeting with unions where finance staff and representatives from all the different unions come together on a monthly basis. And we've been doing that. We started to do that earlier in this current year in preparation for the fiscal year 21-22 process, but also just to make sure we're all hearing the same information about where we are right now. And as we get new information, we're sharing it with the unions and they can then share it with their with the staff that they represent. And so we're having a meeting on the 25th as scheduled right now. And then the City Council will be having a workshop that's being proposed to be just talking about priority setting and other things of that nature. And that is, as of right now, proposed to happen in late March. So already in the month of March, there's a number of points for which City Council, residents, stakeholders, unions, businesses, whomever can provide some input into the budget process. Then we move to April.
Can I do a little update?
Yes.
That meeting in March is not really necessarily going to be directly tied to the budget. We're still in the process of formulating that, and we'll be coming back to, we'll be working with council on that agenda, but it may not, I don't want folks to think that they need to gear up for a budget meeting in March as part of a workshop. That first one won't be that.
Thank you for that. In April, that is when we're going to have our first official community budget meeting. So as I stated, community can always provide input at our city council meetings, but we are getting together a actual budget community meeting. There'll be one per month. So April, May, and June, and the dates are included here. And we'll be doing those virtually and make sure we do our best to get the word out so we can get a really good representation of the community to come and attend. Later in April, we're going to have a follow-up council workshop, as Laura mentioned. Then also there'll be some community workshops with management partners to discuss the budget forecast and the dashboard so that the community also can understand what it is we're talking about and what the long-term financial or fiscal sustainability plan for the city looks like. We have another meeting with unions. And then once again, we're going to be back to council with an update on where we are currently in the fiscal year, but also having another opportunity for input around the budget development process for next fiscal year. May 4th is per the charter, the date for which the City Council is to receive the first draft of the fiscal year 2022 annual budget process. So between March and April, we're hoping to get some information from community, other stakeholders, City Council, so that when we present the first budget to you all in May, we have incorporated or at least provided information and feedback to all of you as part of that presentation. We'll have another community meeting. We will, the residents as well as the council will have the opportunity to hear from departments where they'll be presenting their budgets and talking about the services they provide, and council and community can ask questions about that. And then we'll have possibly another update from management partners around, on the fiscal sustainability plan. And then we'll have another meeting with unions. In June, that's when we're really wrapping up the budget process so that we can have our budget adopted by the end of June. So as of right now, that date is June 22nd, but this is where we really start in the month of June, and even in May, we really start coming to council more often. And in June, it may be every single council meeting where we are just wrapping up the whole budget process and providing kind of that final opportunities for feedback. Laura, before I go to the next slide, do you want to mention anything about the calendar so far? All right, next slide, please, KCRT. And thank you so much to KCRT staff for doing this for us. A few guiding questions that we just would like for the council to consider and hopefully provide some information to us, just so we make sure we're on the right track, that we're being as transparent once again as possible, and we're being as collaborative as possible and hearing back from the council about what it is that you want to see. So number one, do you have any feedback on what I just presented? So on the proposed timeline for fiscal year 21-22 and on the process. So just thinking about what type of outreach do we need to do? So we plan on doing a variety, especially for the virtual community meetings, right? We have some experience in other departments in terms of making sure the word is out there and we're getting feedback from the community. We have to do surveys online. We will be utilizing social media, working with community-based organizations, neighborhood councils, and other city venues and methods to get the word out about these meetings. We want to, use the weekly report and the city's website and those other types of things to make sure we get information out to the public so that they can join and participate in these meetings. But is there anything else that we're missing? Things that you really want us to make sure we do?
And sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just, and then the next one is around stakeholders. And so we want to make sure we do really wide outreach. So it's community, business, community-based organizations that have the opportunity to participate if they would like to do so. But are there specific stakeholders that you really want to make sure we're outreaching to and are part of this process? And then in general, are there other comments or feedbacks about the process?
Yeah, so what I would recommend is that so you see the 3 questions here. LaShonda can give you a little bit more flavor on 2 and 3, but Mayor, what I would recommend, these were kind of designed as just sort of opportunities to think about, what feedback in general about budget you all want to be giving us. And so I would recommend, Mayor, that as soon as LaShonda has finished, that each council member have an opportunity to just, take 1 or 2 minutes to just sort of generally share their thoughts, including if they have any specific feedback on these, but it doesn't have to be limited to just these questions.
And just to wrap up, second question is about what items should we consider? So before we come to you in May with the first draft of the budget, what items do you want us to consider now and have conversations about? And then finally, is the council interested in really engaging in, as Laura mentioned, that longer term mission, vision, values, goals, priority, whatever it is that you want to call it, development process? So that concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this is an opportunity for council members to ask questions or make comments on either of the 2 presentations. I thought I saw Councilor Martinez's hand up earlier. Did you take it down?
I did take it down. I took it down because I saw that that the presentation wasn't finished with. I was curious. This is my first time to see those slides. Those slides weren't included in the packet that was printed for Councilmember Bates and myself. Are they up in the packet that's provided electronically?
Which slides you talking about?
No, so as we said last week, we knew, we told council last week at the meeting that we wouldn't be able to develop a full-blown presentation in time for the packet. And still today, again, the slides weren't included because they were drafted this afternoon.
Okay. Okay. So this is the first time for any of us to have seen those slides.
Correct.
And when will they be available to us?
But tomorrow.
Tomorrow? Okay. Okay. So I wanted to talk about guiding principles. And you mentioned that neither document showed principles, and I'm going to have to disagree with you because principles that I gathered from the presentation by Lift Up Richmond was cooperation, collaboration, community engagement, and I didn't see any of that in the presentation by the management partners. You know, in fact, I really didn't, and they actually, you know, had a mission statement, or rather a statement for their document on the very first page. You know, which actually illustrates what a mission statement should look like. You know, as opposed to, or rather, a mission statement or a principle. You know, it says Lift Up Richmond's intent in submitting these policies is to increase transparency, reduce ambiguity, and promote an inclusive and democratic process for the development of budgeting processes, you know, policies. So that tells you what the principle is. You know, if I look at management partners, I don't see any such statement. You know, it seems as if they launched directly into a budget policies. And following the guiding principle are, you know, they label them as policies, which is what they are. And they have management partners policies, proposals, and Lift Up Richmond's policy proposals. So they did a great job in laying them out side by side so that we could compare and contrast. And I appreciate that. How much did we pay Lift Up? How much did we pay management partners to do the work that they've done?
The total contract that council approved was a little under 85,000, and council hasn't received the full package in terms of what they are tasked to do.
Okay, so considering what they've done so far, how much money do you think we've spent on the work they've done?
I would estimate, without looking at invoices, approximately 30 of the 85,000.
Okay, 30,000, and because during the presentation and even now looking at this, they actually look like generic proposals, you know, that could apply to any city. You know, in fact, you know, they could have just pulled this out of a drawer for any other city and given it to us and said, you know, this is you know, this is what I recommend for you. And I find that troubling, you know, that there wasn't any specifics to Richmond, and you know, and the specifics that were there were kind of like names that you can just kind of put into a Mad Lib. So I do agree with Lift Up Richmond's principles, which are cooperation, collaboration, community involvement, and as they said, increased transparency. And I also want to thank them for putting in so much work at the exorbitant price of $0, as opposed to the work put in by managing partners for 30,000, you said, approximately. So anyway, I think the fact that we got the same, if not better work from Richmond residents for the price of nothing shows the kind of commitment that Richmond residents and organizations have for Richmond, much more than some people that we hired from out of town. So anyway, I'll let people reflect on that before I make more statements.
Councilmember Martinez, if I could, I just want to point out that what we hired management partners to do is a lot of what you have not seen yet, and they are coming back to you later in March. What we hired them to do was to analyze the city's financial forecast, to prepare a dashboard decision-making tool, to initiate a fiscal sustainability plan and gather data, to analyze data and prepare an initial matrix of strategies, to help us develop a plan towards a 2-year budget process, to facilitate a community engagement workshop, and to finalize the plan and support implementation. That is a lot of what you have not. They have done a lot of work already in the background that they presented to staff, but they are presenting to city council later. So I just want to point out that a lot of what we paid for them to do, you haven't seen yet.
Okay, well, I guess my question was misunderstood. What I meant was how much do you think it cost us for them to have provided the what they called budget guiding principles?
I almost want to say that was free, because what we so you have free and free, I guess.
Okay.
So when you compare it, it looks good, because we are paying them for the fiscal sustainability plan and ask for budget principles.
Well, that's good to hear. I'm glad to hear that we got something free from them, and the quality of the work, I think, illustrates free, considering that they provided budget guidelines disguised as principles that they wanted us to adopt without providing a real understanding as to why we should do that, which I think Lift Up Richmond did. I think they did a very good job of providing rationale for doing what they recommended. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, just a reminder that the goal was, this is what similar communities who have long-term fiscal sustainability, have structurally balanced budget, those are some of the things that they are doing. And so that was the goal, was to say, hey, here's some options of things that we could look at to have that sustainability. And again, we should probably go through a process to check in and see how much of a value that is.
Right. Yeah. But as I was trying to point out, we were asked to adopt them at the last council meeting.
It was, so there was an opportunity from Brown Act purposes. If you all had wanted to do so, then we would have been allowed, it would have been Brown Act compliant to do so. But again, it was a draft, it was for initial conversation. And so it's good that we're continuing this conversation. And that's what we're recommending doing, is continue the conversation.
Okay, well then in the future, under agenda reports, if it's only intended as a jumping off place for conversation, then the recommended action shouldn't say, and adopt budget guiding principles.
Sure, there was some more about that in the staff report, but we'll do a better job about that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, who's next? Councilmember Bates.
Well, thank you, City Manager LaShonda, for your presentation. You asked the question, were there other organizations that I thought, or we thought, should be included? Obviously, the coordinated neighborhood councils, they represent a large segment of our community, and the business community, including the Chamber of Commerce and Council of Richmond Industries, and the 23rd Street Merchants Association, and there may be a few others. I noticed that the police and the fire were not included in this Lift Up Richmond group, but their voices should be heard as well when we talk about budget. I don't see how you can give SEIU exclusive right and not give the same consideration to the police and the fire. And one thing I would like to see in the budget is a comprehensive anticipated financial revenue analysis. That would include potential new developments as well as perhaps loss of revenue from certain major firms as well. So those are the things that I would like to share with the staff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, who's next? Councilmember McLaughlin?
Yeah, I really like the Lift Up Richmond proposal. I think it shows flexibility, transparency, fiscal responsibility, and sustainability. They heard our comments from the last meeting. I think they put it together well. It is just guidelines. Guidelines can be changed. I see no problem with us approving this today, knowing that we could always modify it. But I really want to get into the meat of the budget. And I think if we approve these, it gives us that framework of guidelines that I think are very responsible. And we can move forward with the calendar that LaShonda presented. In terms of the other aspects of the questions that LaShonda presented, I will need a little more time to think about budget items. I wasn't expecting to come up with that today. And in terms of a drawn out process for mission, et cetera, I think we really need to get some sort of framework, again, that can be modified when, if needed, but it's so transparent, the proposals by Lift Up Richmond that I support. I do have a few amendments that I would like to share at some point, but I know we have public speakers also. But I think it's so transparent, or it highlights transparency in that things will come back to the council on a regular basis, which means that public input will be more front and center for our residents in general. And that is what we want. We want the framework, the guidelines that allows our council to have the budget and various aspects of the budget come back to us when changes occur or when staff has the data that we need to see, and then the public can see it as well. So I'm thinking we should approve this again with any amendments, and I have a couple small ones, and get on with the meat of the budget. We want to figure out how we're going to identify items that will serve our community. And we only have, April and May and June. And believe me, we all know who have been on the council how long things can take in terms of coming up with the finalized budget. So my view, and I want to hear from the public speakers, is that we make a motion to approve this with any amendments, if indeed others agree with me. But I really, like I said, don't want to prolong a process when we know that the proposal we have from Lift Up Richmond allows for much input going forward, fiscal year after fiscal year. But right now we're just talking about 21, 22, and we should get on with it.
Okay, other council members, Councilmember Jimenez.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I just, in terms of transparency, I think it will be great that if we have all the information when it's going to present. I know that maybe you were working until the last time, but you added 2 slides to that presentation, and you were asked, and you put out in this right here to us some things that maybe we are not and they are long questions about, do we want to have this process? And I think like for me it's more about that the process that we have to put on the agenda things that are going to be presented in the city council is part of the transparency that we are asking. So it's not just for us, but it's for the public also to know that. And so I think that this is something that I would like that in process wise, we make sure that we follow, staff follow, city council follow, and anybody follows, because this is kind of like respect the public, respect that we are having this conversation and the information is out there. And
Can I
think,
make a comment on that?
Yeah.
So that is always a best practice and something we always want to do. I really need help and respect from the council for our staff in terms of what we can do. When we are told that we are having a meeting the very next week, and I shared at last week's meeting that we wouldn't be able to get something ready in time, I ask for your grace and consideration that we don't get chastised, because we're working really hard and all of the staff here is doing everything they can. So please know that when we are told there's going to be a special meeting and it's the week after, and we say we're not going to be able to meet your expectations for transparency in terms of providing information in the packet, which only, please respect that we're doing the best we can, and we won't be able to meet your expectations.
I appreciate that. And I'd like to say that it was the mayor's decision. He kept me from making a motion to extend the time for you to be able to put your presentation together so that we could have a presentation, you know, from both of you with equal time. So, you know, I mean, I can only do what I can do, and the mayor is the chair.
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay, other council members?
No,
I think
I haven't
Claudia
finished.
wasn't done yet. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think we are trying to put like values and guidelines and trying to confuse both of things. I think like for me, the guidelines is just a direction for how we are going to do the budget, and the budget itself, the things that we are putting there has to represent our values. But this is all semantic, right? And I think like last week, the mayor said, these are just guidelines, right? And right now we want to have this long process where we really need to, like, I think like there is already a great work that the management partner did. And now there is another great work to adding to what management partner did. I don't think like there is a thing of competition here. I think it's like what management partner did needed some more some additional things that I really appreciate at Richmond to do it. So we have more, there is more meat into the guidelines. And so it's no competition. It's not like, oh, we should just like kind of like put these longer, and really what we need to do is really to go into the work of the budget. And this is a long process. We need to start as soon as possible to have a budget for this year, fiscal year, so that we can approve. And you know that this is a lot of conversation. You have some conversation that has to go with the unions. You had to come here and approve it. So I really appreciate that it is put together in a way that we can see what management partners did, what Lift Contra Costa is adding, which is not in competition, is adding. And I think like we should move forward. This should be the guidelines so that our city manager has really like can move with that to start looking into working into a budget that we need to adapt. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Bates.
I don't believe what I'm hearing. what I'm hearing, and maybe someone better correct me, Management Partners was only an arm where the city tried to use to come in with certain information. And now what I hear, and I hope I'm wrong, is that now this council, part of it, want to supplement Management Partners or whomever and have this Lift Up Richmond become a dominant factor in the budgetary process. You better look at the charter. You cannot usurp the city manager. And maybe you're uncomfortable, but I'd be damned if I'm going to vote for Lift Up Richmond to be the dominant decision makers as we go forward in this budgetary process. And you're stepping on very legal grounds, and I think the city attorney need to clarify. You cannot delegate. The charter mandates that the city manager and the city council. Now, I don't mind seeing Lift Up Richmond being part as the Richmond Neighborhood Council, as a police officers, and whomever in the public. But I will not support them being the dominant factor in determining what kind of budget and how we allocate funds. So if that's your intention, count me out.
Okay, any other comments? I've got a couple if I don't see any other hands up. So a couple of points I'd like to make. First of all, I've seen a lot of criticism of Management Partners and even the city manager for bringing forth the principles last week. But look, folks, let's be fair. The city manager took the initiative of putting out a set of draft guidelines. Lift Up Richmond did not take that initiative. They weren't even talking about it. They didn't even think about it until the city manager and Management Partners brought them forward. So everything they've done is reactive to something that somebody else initiated, and that's fine. But I think it's unfair to criticize somebody for starting the process just because you don't agree with everything that's in it. Somebody's got to start the process, and the city manager did that, and we had something to start with. And I think this has been, it's been a good discussion. But a couple of observations I would make is that the presentation by Lift Up Richmond was not, for the most part, it was not inconsistent with the previous week's presentation. It just went in a lot of areas. It just went into more detail. So I think probably about 80% of it was not necessarily inconsistent. It was just more detail, and I'll talk about that in a minute. On the other hand, I think in several areas, it really went into too much detail. It was too prescriptive. And I'll echo what Councilmember Bates said. I'm going to read this. Here's what the charter says. The charter says, the city manager shall prepare the budget annually and submit it to the city council. It also says the mayor shall work with the city manager in preparing the annual budget for submission to the city council. There's nothing in the charter that says that Lift Up Richmond shall prepare the budget. They are an organization that has no more or no less right to weigh in on the budget than anybody else. So I think that I would agree with Councilmember Bates that in a lot of areas, the Lift Up Richmond's proposed guidelines are really too granular, too prescriptive, and really infringe on the city manager's authority to come up with a budget. Now, a couple of other observations. On almost every slide that Lift Up Richmond showed, they had asterisks down at the bottom, and they cited the city of Oakland, or the city of Los Angeles. I'm not sure that either of these cities is one that we necessarily want to emulate. Currently, the city of Oakland is struggling with a $72 million deficit, and I'm not sure that's somewhere we want to go. The city of Los Angeles is struggling with a $675 million deficit. I'm not sure that's a place we want to go either. So I think when these two cities are cited as the source of a lot of these guidelines, I think we ought to think twice about whether that's really where we want to go as a source of our guidelines. Another thing, I will bet you that I heard the word transparency bandied about at least 36 times, maybe more, in this presentation. And I would say that I would not lift up Richmond as an icon of transparency. The Measure U process, which they so proudly took credit for, was probably the most opaque public policy process I've ever seen happen in the city of Richmond. They took this on, and nobody had any idea what was going on with it until they unveiled it a week before we had to adopt it. So if that's their idea of transparency, I'm not sure that's a place I want to go. So the final thing is, I don't think we're ready to adopt these tonight. The agenda item says receive a presentation and provide feedback, and I don't read feedback as meaning adopt it. I read feedback as feedback. So I don't know. I see the city attorney just popped in. Do you have something you want to offer on that?
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. I do agree that the agenda would not permit us to take any action this evening, but certainly direction can be given to staff on the presentations or any of the items that were discussed or that are being discussed.
Thank you. And we'll agree with Councilmember Bates that I believe, in spite of what I said, I don't want you to misread it, I think there was a lot of valuable input in the Lift Up Richmond presentation, a lot of food for thought. But as Councilmember Bates says, we also have a lot of other organizations in the city that in the interest of transparency, we should hear from. We haven't heard from the police and the firefighters yet, and they're part of the biggest budget component of our city. We haven't heard from the business community. We haven't heard from the neighborhood councils. There are a lot of people out there we haven't heard from, and I think we ought to continue this process and solicit input from them before we adopt anything. And again, I just want to go back to what the charter says. The charter says the city manager shall prepare the budget annually and submit it to the city council. Clearly, the city council has a role in this, but the city council's role is to accept it or reject it or tweak it a little bit, not to drive the process. And then finally, this was more like a question. The last slide, I believe, from Lift Up Richmond talked about a survey. And we've been doing the biannual survey since 2007, and I would be interested to know if they deem that to be adequate, or whether they want some other process. So I see a couple of hands up before we go to public speakers. I see the vice mayor's hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah. And this was a while ago, but the city manager and I talked about participatory budgeting versus incremental versus zero-sum budgeting. And it's, even if I didn't agree with Lift Up Richmond, which I'm not saying I don't, I would still vote for them to participate. As Councilmember Bates and Mayor Budd mentioned, I think everyone should have an opportunity to weigh in on the budget and to participate. I'm a big proponent of participatory government. I guess for me, my biggest apprehension moving forward is how we interact with one another. I think the city manager kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but the general suspicion that some of my colleagues attack the staff with is concerning. And I'm not sure if we will be able to come to an agreement on guidelines or the budgeting overall if we aren't willing to put aside our preconceived notions or what we may be feeling about individuals or the work that they carry out. I'm not expecting everyone to do as I do and read everything and speak to everyone prior to the meeting, but I really expect people to be a little bit more respectful and a little bit more tactful in their interactions with staff, because they're not trying to scam us, which is the general suspicion that like is coming off. And it is somewhat disheartening as well, because when I call and I ask them some of the same questions that's being asked here tonight, it's very open and honest questioning. So to put somebody on the spot on camera, I'm not sure that we're fostering a good working relationship. So I just want to make sure that that is also being like this, that's also being called out as well, because that's a part of leadership and we have to make sure that we're adhering to that as well.
Mayor, you're muted.
Councilmember Willis, did you want to weigh in before we go to public speakers?
Yeah, just a couple of comments based on everything I heard and just previous experience. Look, I don't see nothing wrong with how the lift up recommendations were tailored, because at the end of the day, this has just been my experience and this is just what I have noticed. At the end of the day, when we're talking about basing policies on cities that have best practices, one of the practices that I have seen other cities do is they do cut services and head straight to layoffs before anything else. And that's always been a huge point of contention that you hear across the region, as workers end up being the one to take the hit when it comes to being fiscally responsible and balancing the budget. And I made that clear multiple times. I don't want to be that kind of person that sacrifices workforce for the sake of just trying to balance the budget. I like exploring other avenues and having deeper collaboration, which is what was forced upon us for the past 3 years. We were forced to go into collaboration because whenever a budget document did come out, let's just say it wasn't necessarily a peaceful process. And last year we almost didn't even adopt a budget. So yeah, whether we adopt these policies, not adopt these policies, at the end of the day, to me, it's going to be about community participation first and foremost, because if we don't have that community participation, you have an incident, which was what this council did back in 2015, I believe. We fell on hard times. There was a big fight over what services cut and don't get cut. And next thing you know, the next day on the news, I seen that a library service got cut that allowed art projects for those who were dealing with challenges. And that put Richmond in a bad light. And when the layoffs were happening for the past couple of years, we did create a participatory task force that had multiple department heads, labor unions, along with the city manager and 3 council members. So if these policies are meant to be more community inclusive, that's what I want to do. At the end of the day, I just want to balance a budget that maximizes services and doesn't look to layoffs first as a way to balance the budget. And those are my 2 cents on this. And absolutely, yes, let's have respect amongst each other here. We're all coming with our own perspectives and our own individual experiences to bring into the discussion so we can make the best possible decision. And I'm want to show up to this meeting too, just assuming good intentions, represent your opinion, and then, vote the way you're going to vote and just leave it at that. So those are the end of my comments.
You had me kind of nervous when you started off with, I don't see nothing wrong, Councilmember Willis. You had me kind of nervous there.
Tomato, we're talking about 2 different things, but I see what you're saying.
Mayor,
Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. If I made any comments that were negative about any individual, I apologize. My comments are more towards policy and towards what is said. When the mayor referred to the city charter having the city manager in charge of the budget, I think we're all in agreement with that. Only this is not the budget. These are budget principles. So when it comes to making the budget, it will be the city manager who makes those decisions. And it will be us who either approves or don't approve. But as far as principles, as far as policies, that is our purview. It is our responsibility to come up with policies that will guide the city manager in making the budget. So that's what we're doing here. And as Councilmember Willis pointed out, in our last budget, it did require community togetherness. It did require collaboration in order to balance the budget. And, you know, if we can have that same kind of collaboration, then we're going to have buy-in from everyone. So once again, my apologies if I made any dispersions against any particular person.
Okay, Councilmember Jimenez.
Thank you. I think like for me is about also when I say transparency is about with the public and respect with the public and providing all the information. And I had been asking for information, and when I asked for information, the staff told me one thing, and then I found out that it was another thing. And it wasn't until we had this conversation publicly that they say the other thing. So for me, it's not about picking or choosing. It's more about having really honest conversation among everybody and including the public. I think like for me, the most important thing here is that the public has the right information so they can fully participate, because as you know, these budget issues tend to be really difficult to understand if you don't even like it's for us. It's difficult that we are here, we are trying to see, we are trying to understand. So I just really appreciate that the right information is put there, that we are not going, we don't have to go out to look for that information, and that we have a collaboration and a collaborative process, not only among the city staff, among the unions, among the community organization, residents, so everybody knows what we are talking about and what are the decisions that we are making. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to the public speakers. Madam Clerk, how many do we have?
Okay, right now we have 12 speakers, and the speakers are Lisa Johnson, Mike Parker, Tarno Abbott, and Joey Schlemmer, Jamelia Abrahami, Emily Ross, Rob Smith, Elsa Stevens, Deborah Bayer, Randy Joseph, Ben Terrio, and I believe he may be the last speaker. Oh, and Andrea, Marlon A. and Andrea. They'll each have 2 minutes, and please be prepared to unmute yourself when your name is called. And Laura, please call the speakers.
City Clerk, Tarno Abbott had tried to get in, so.
I read her name.
Oh, you did? Okay,
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry. Okay, my apologies.
Okay, first speaker is Lisa Johnson. Lisa, you'll have 2 minutes to speak. You can go ahead and start.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Last week, Councilmember McLaughlin, her fellow RPA council members, granted Lift Up Richmond, comprised of outside special interest groups, outside consultants, SEIU city employees, and many individuals who do not even live in Richmond, the ability to try and dictate Richmond's budgetary and reserve policies. Lift Up Richmond failed to tell you that they also fund and bought the RPA council seats. So it is no surprise to taxpayers and residents that these same council members are pandering once again to their campaign donors versus representing what is best for Richmond and all of its residents. Lift Up Richmond is also the same group that brought Measure U, which now gives Richmond the dubious distinction of having the highest business tax structure in the entire Bay Area and nation. Last week, Lift Up Richmond representatives called in and criticized the city manager for utilizing an outside consultant, yet they don't recognize their own blatant hypocrisy since they too use outside consultants. Why didn't taxpayers and residents get equal time to present their own presentation tonight? This is exactly what happened during the June budget talks and when the council voted to put Measure U on the ballot. There was no prior outreach, not even to a single business during the entire 8-month time period when Lift Up Richmond drafted Measure U. There was no transparency. Why? Why were businesses so disrespected and their voices silenced? Yet here we are again tonight under a false claim by Councilmember McLaughlin that she even remotely cares about the voices of all residents. She even tried to illegally just now pass a set of guidelines tonight based on irrelevant cities running very large budget deficits, and for which the public has not been granted a single opportunity to help shape, and to also usurp the city manager, our city's CEO. I am also highly offended by the Lift Up Richmond representative who claimed tonight that members of the public even remotely participated in this self-serving presentation. This is about a lack of fair representation for all of Richmond. This is about the RPA and their base. I would like to close by reminding the city manager and council that residents, businesses, and taxpayers are your most important stakeholders. And thank you for including us.
Time has expired. Thank you. Next speaker is Mike Parker. Mike, you'll have 2 minutes to speak. You can go ahead and start.
Thank you. Last week, the city manager brought in a proposal to be adopted by the council as the guidelines or some other word to help work with the budget process. There was some discussion about it, and partly as a result of that, people wanted to make alternative suggestions to that. And so this week we have a series of a number of amendments to it and changes and proposals, which I think everybody will agree improve the budget proposal considerably. For the most part, I agree with Mayor Butt, there's very little difference on most of the issues between what is said in one thing and the other. Some have more detail, one has more detail on one thing, one has more detail on something else. One puts slightly more emphasis on one thing and something else. There were a couple of things which haven't been discussed where there were significant differences, but apparently those aren't important enough for people to discuss because people were back to the general discussion of talking about abstractions here. Look, everybody who just heard Liesl Johnson speak knows that she's perfectly capable of drafting her own proposals and submitting them. They were never closed to her. She never made a set of proposals to the committee. None of the other groups that she's talking about, the Council of Industries or anybody else, has intervened in this. They have the option. They don't need a handout. What we need is more citizen participation and getting involved voluntarily, not waiting until they are specifically asked, what is your opinion on this subject? So I suggest that even if we can't vote on it this time, that this be put off for a vote till the next time, that it just be voted on the next time, and then we move on to what the
Your
real
time has expired. Thank you. Next speaker is Tarnell Abbott. Tarnell, you'll have 2 minutes to speak. You can go ahead and start.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I need to just reiterate a couple of things that I find very problematical in the management partners proposal that the city council was asked to vote on last week. Number 3, reallocation of money among departments. I say no. That definitely changes what the budget would look like and what the policies would look like. The reserves, I agree, you don't need to have them at 17%. They're there to be used when you need them, use them. Equipment replacement, let's try to fix and make things last longer. Other people can do that, so can we. We've been very bad about over replacement of certain vehicles. Charges for services. Okay, we pay our taxes. I'm a citizen, I'm a resident and a homeowner. I pay my taxes. I expect some services in return. I do not expect to pay for the library, for example, for use of the library. General fund, number 12, general fund should be earmarked. Otherwise, it's the whim of which department gets funded. You need to earmark the general fund monies. It's ridiculous to say that it shouldn't be earmarked. Capital projects, please remember you need a new library and you actually need to build a police department too. Service level reductions, hello, you're gonna write that into your procedures. That is a major policy decision. Don't you dare adopt that. That's number 20. And for the last one, number 25, do a real budget examination. Look at the financials for Point Melody and the AstraZeneca Campus Bay. You're going to put us in the hole a lot more than you'll ever get out of it with those two. And respect the public.
Time has expired. Thank you. Next speaker is Joey Schlemmer. Joey, you'll have 2 minutes to speak. You can go ahead and start.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Joey Schlemmer, Richmond resident. I'm a former City of Richmond employee. I just had a few comments about the presentation that was made tonight. One that's really concerning of mine is reserves. I would suggest that a few people walk up the street to the city of San Pablo, knock on the door of City Hall and ask them, the small city of San Pablo, why they have more money in reserves than the city of Richmond. I'm being told that they have anywhere between 20 and $40 million. I hate to think that it's merely because of a casino. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is some revenue generating things. Measure U is going to be an absolute disaster, and I hope we can fix it before it's too late. I'd like everybody that owns a home or that has access to a property bill, take a look at the ad valorem portion on the right-hand side and look at the Richmond pension tax. I am paying almost $500. I'm being told, and I'd like for the city to confirm this, that there is $20 million coming into that fund for people that haven't been in that fund since 1963 or 1964. I can't imagine that there's very many people left. You want to do something good and put something worthwhile on the ballot, readjust the Richmond pension tax initiative that was passed in 1978 that has no sunset clause, unlike a similar one that was passed in Oakland, and take that money. There shouldn't be any reason why we shouldn't have at least 30% in reserves of our operating budget. And then on top of that, use that other money for funding overdue pay raises for our city workers and the like. Think outside the box and stop trying to take it to the business.
Time has expired. Thank you. Next speaker is Jamile Ibrahimi. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. You can go ahead and start.
Hello, Mayor and City Council. My name is Jamile Ibrahimi, and I'm with the Rise Center. We're a member of Lift Up Richmond. As the city moves forward, I'm calling in to urge council to support and pass a set of budget guiding policies, that provide clear and transparent direction, prioritizes services for the community, centers democracy, and supports inclusive and collaborative budget development processes. As someone who directly participated in the campaigns for the last two the last two revenue measures, I had the opportunity to hear from young people and voters about the critical need for services and the critical need to protect and expand those services. And as we've seen in the last year, the global pandemic has only exacerbated the needs and inequities that existed prior to March of 2020. Additionally, in our direct work with community members, we heard from young people and voters that they want to be meaningfully engaged in the budgeting process. In order for that to happen, they need materials to be accessible and that there needs to be transparency, especially when we're planning and bringing in new revenue sources. They want to see how those resources are being managed and allocated. As the city moves forward, we hope that the city commits to listening and working in partnership with community on future policies and in development of the values and principles. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Emily Ross. Emily, you have 2 minutes to speak. You can go ahead and start.
Thank you. Good evening, council and community. My name is Emily Ross and I'm a Richmond resident. I wanted to thank Lift Up Richmond and city staff for the presentations tonight. I'm speaking on the public input component, the only thing I feel qualified to speak on. I've been personally making efforts to better understand our city's financial situation and budget without much related education or professional experience. There's tremendous value in hearing the discussion of budgetary considerations such as this evening. When items do go before City Council, it is publicly noticed and thus provides opportunities for community members to listen and speak. That being said, there are certainly many other resident engagement strategies beyond City Council meetings that could be explored. I also appreciated the fiscal year 2021-22 budget calendar that was provided by the city management team. One distinction I see is that Lift Up Richmond's proposal also includes a survey process. So I'm going to yield the rest of my time, but thank you for supporting strategies that allow opportunities for depth of participation.
Thank you. Next speaker is Rob Smith. Rob, you'll have 2 minutes to speak. You can go ahead and start.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So I am a Richmond resident. I am not associated with any of the special interest groups like Uplift Richmond or Lift Up Richmond, like some of these other callers. So this is a pretty unbiased opinion. This meeting is shocking. One thing I noticed, and I want to get clarification on, is did the RPA collaborate with Lift Up Richmond to come up with this budget and their talking points ahead of time? Lift Up Richmond doesn't have a website. I tried to find it. I tried to actually learn more as a resident, and none of that was available to me. So when you talk about transparency, there wasn't any. Claudia harped for a long time tonight about transparency and making sure the agenda is correct. A couple weeks ago, the council and the RPA actually violated potentially the Brown Act by making a vote on the Civic Center lot for a project, and it wasn't included on the agenda. So Claudia is not clean. RPA is not clean on transparency either. What I'd like to say is I represent union carpenters. So most of our work comes from private entities. And what is missing from this, which Nat Bates pointed out, is that we need ways to uplift the private businesses in this community. They are absent, they are leaving. And that is where a lot of our tax base is going to come from. There's a lot of people in my own community that own their own businesses. And so that should be the focus. The city should do things to promote private business here. So thank you for your time, and do not vote on this tonight.
Time has expired. Thank you. The next speaker is Elsa Stevens. Elsa, you'll have 2 minutes to speak. You can go ahead and start.
Thank you. Lift Up Richmond guidelines are really good. Lift Up Richmond warned Richmond against making mistakes like that other cities like LA did. No swaps. They are payday lenders for cities. Don't hire teams of accountants to gamble away city funds going in and out of variable funds. The city is in the business of keeping hospitals in the area and fixing potholes. Mom and pop businesses pay lower taxes thanks to Measure U. It's Amazon, UPS, Chevron. That's who's going to really be our benefactors. Walmart kills mom and pop businesses. They want to continue to pay slave wages. They actually teach new hires to file for food stamps. Now, budgeting is a long process. Get her done and adopt Lift Up Richmond tonight if possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Deborah Bayer. Deborah, you'll have 2 minutes to speak. You can go ahead and start.
Thank you. Last week I watched the management partner presentation, and it was a little bit mind-numbing, and the way I expected it to be, but it was, he went through it was very logical. And then during this week, I had a chance to look at the agenda items, and I saw the Lift Up Richmond presentation, and I was struck by how clear it was, that it was easy to read. I saw that it was almost like management partner had given a template, which is a pretty much standard Boilermaker template you would give to any city for, how to be structured physically, fiscally sound and everything. And what Lift Up Richmond did was turn it into language about our city and ourselves. And I was really touched by it. And I felt like I could understand it better. It made sense to me. You have these sort of, on the left, there was management partners, and it was kind of short and very sort of bureaucratic, using that kind of language. And then when I'd read the Lift Up Richmond document, it either added to or substituted words that made it really much clearer to me, how, what it was saying, basically, explaining, things like the encumbrances and anything that could make the budget process, more inclusive. I thought it was a great document, actually. I'm sure you can tweak it. I know you don't have to vote on it tonight. You can't vote on it. But I really support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Randy Joseph. Randy, you'll have 2 minutes to speak. You can go ahead and start.
Hi, everybody. My name is Randy Joseph. I am a Richmond resident, part of supporting what some of the work Lift Up Richmond is doing. And what I'm going to say is just, I always say this, and I come to this, it's like, it's not telling the city manager that she can't do the budget. What we're saying is have the city manager, have the community be part of this process. And that's, I think, in the simplest words of these fancy things that we're trying to say, is that we need community input in how this process is going to go. And that's simple as this. All this other language to try to equate it to businesses are leaving because Measure U, where you don't have the facts on that, you just blowing that out, pulling that out from somewhere just because you want to pull it out as an argument because it fits what you see, fits what you want to say. But the issue is that the community does not have equal involvement in how this budget process does. We just usually get a budget put in front of us. It's not really explained to us in a process that makes us understandable. Exactly with the management partners presentation last week, a lot of community didn't understand what they wanted to say. That was a part of the issue with Richard coming in and make the presentation to make sure that it's able to be read and maybe to understand by everybody in the community. That's what the guiding principles is about. It's about making sure that the community has involvement, bring everybody to the table. I agree with that, Bates. Bring police, bring fire, bring workers, bring the businesses to the table so we can all understand what the budget is and we all have a conversation. And the whole community as all needs to have a conversation as this. Like, part of my issue is that the city brings out information and they have acronyms, but they don't explain the acronyms, but they want the community to go along with what needs to be said. These are the little things that need to be changed in this city to help support a community-driven city, to have the budget that is a moral document for the city, is to bring the city along. Have all those conversations with community partners, have all the conversations with business and community. That's what brings inclusivity to this.
Time has expired. Thank you. The next speaker is Marlene A. Marlene, you'll have 2 minutes to speak. You can go ahead and start.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I feel like I've been attending these a lot recently. Getting kind of exhausting, but I keep hearing a lot about transparency and inclusivity and community, and I love those things. Oh my God, I support those things. I'm right there with you guys. I mean, the whole presentation by Lift Up Richmond, it's predicated on the notion that they have elicited community input. And honestly, like, maybe I'm blind, maybe I haven't seen, maybe I haven't heard, I'm deaf, I can't hear, I didn't see that work. And so I'm left with questions. And Again, I'm a huge proponent of giving voice to the voiceless. I love transparency and communication. I support that. And so I have some questions for Lift Up Richmond, especially because I felt like they were really hammering away at that message that they have elicited community input. And so my question is, how do they achieve these? My questions are, how do they achieve this very important goal? How is community input elicited? What are the specific procedures? How are they doing that? Is it phone banking? Is it, canvassing, pounding, pounding the pavement? Who are the participants? Are they both English, Spanish speaking? Where is that data? I want to know where it is. How can I find it? That's what transparency means. You show, you demonstrate. And that's what I want to see. I want to see Lift Up Richmond, the city council, start showing your stuff. Don't just say things, right? Those buzzwords, they're sweet. They're, they make things cloudy. Stop using the buzzwords and start showing the data. And no, you cannot vote on these guidelines, which, by the way, guidelines, that's a framework, that's a structure. So even though they're not prescriptive, they're still a structure. So do not vote and start showing your stuff.
Time has expired. Thank you. And the next speaker will be Andrea, and the following 5 speakers after that will be David Sharples, phone number ending in 2009, Henry, Ross Harris, and Christina B. Andrea, you'll have 2 minutes to speak. You can go ahead and start.
Yeah. I am Andrea Malarkey. I am an SEIU 10-to-1 member. I'm also a Richmond resident and homeowner and taxpayer. And I, right here in real life time, am proof that any talk about quote unquote the unions as outside interests just simply is inaccurate. I am a resident and a library patron and a parks user, and I drive on Richmond roads. And as a result, I believe in fully funding city services. I also believe in having reserves. And the reason I believe in that is because reserves are the fiscal safety net, which allows us to continue to provide those services during a crisis, just like the one we're in now. And I have a rainy day fund in my household. And for the city, that's what reserves are. But probably most importantly for the conversation that we're having tonight, as a resident and homeowner and taxpayer and community member, I believe that my voice should matter. And as a guiding budgetary principle, I fundamentally believe that community inclusion is key. Frankly, I personally really appreciate the work put in by the Lift Up Richmond Coalition, because it's drawn me into a process that up until now has felt like way too confusing and intimidating to get involved. And so the work that's being done by this coalition makes it possible for me, as a person who works full-time and has my own community involvement, to be part of these really important policy decisions. And so I want to thank you for giving really serious consideration to the recommendations of the Lift Up Richmond Coalition. When it's time to vote on them, I hope that you will support them, because what it does is it supports the community and it supports people like me remaining engaged. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is David Sharples. David, you'll have 2 minutes to speak. You can go ahead and start.
Hello, yeah, my name is David Sharples with the community group ACE, and I'm a Richmond resident, and ACE is a member of the Lift Up Richmond Coalition. Richmond has weathered the storm with a 15% reserve in one of the worst global crises many of us will see in our lifetimes. Building up reserves beyond this level is a great goal to have, but not something we should require at the expense of services. Under the management partners policy, we could never spend reserves below 10% and would have to always prioritize maintaining reserves in the budgeting process. The Lift Up Richmond proposal is designed to build reserves and sustain services. It also sets clear standards for when we will use reserves and how we will restore them to minimize impact to services. The city's documentary transfer tax was approved by over 64% of Richmond voters to fund city services. To respect the choice of the voters, the city needs a clear and transparent policy on how these revenues will be budgeted to support ongoing services. The proposal from management partners leaves it up for interpretation and unclear how we will budget the documentary transfer tax. Other cities have adopted clearer budgeting formulas for estimating this tax in order to provide residents with transparency and stable service levels. Richmond should do the same. Our city's budget is a moral document. Providing transparency and opportunities for democratic participation is absolutely essential to any budgeting policy. The proposed policy from management partners creates too much leeway for changes to be made to the budget without coming to City Council. It also doesn't lay out any clear way for residents to participate in the budgeting process. All major budgeting decisions should be made with oversight of the City Council and an opportunity for the community to make
Time
a
has
voice.
expired. Thank you. The next speaker is the phone number ending in 2009. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. Please state your name for the record. Phone number ending in 2009. Please unmute yourself. I'll move on to Henry for now. We'll come back to that phone number. Henry, you'll have 2 minutes to speak. You can go ahead and start.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Henry Powell. I'm a worker at the City of Richmond. I've been there since 2007. I started off as a temporary worker, and I've been promoted all the way up to a lead worker who is stationed at the marina. And I love working for the City of Richmond. I'm a proud member of Local 1021 SCIU. I was born and raised in Richmond, but I do not live in Richmond. And I just want to speak on, I have a point to make about rejecting the empowerment of the city manager to make the decisions. I feel that the decision-making should always, it's always been in the city council's hands. And that's my comment on tonight. We should just let the city council continue to make the decisions when it comes to the budget and stuff like that. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ross Harris. Ross, you'll have 2 minutes to speak. You can go ahead and start.
Hi there. My name is Ross Harris. I'm a Richmond resident. Just real quick, the management partners, they were presumably chosen to help because they have a track record of helping cities, I'm assuming. And I guess I'm just wondering what Lift Up Richmond's credentials are in terms of budgetary oversight and guidelines. I didn't really take issue with anything that they presented tonight, other than what Tom Butts said, is that, it just kind of got bogged down with a lot of details that maybe it was like a little bit overcooked. I don't know. I'm not that familiar, but I do know that the City of Richmond chose management partners because they help cities. And it just seems to me like we should go with someone that has a track record. If those guidelines need to be tweaked a little bit, that's cool. That seems totally fine to me. But the fact that this was almost brought to a vote tonight seems really strange. That was shocking. I don't like that at all. What else can I say about it? Yeah. I think that having a little bit more reserves is not a bad thing. There was a lot of talk about values, but I think the main value at the moment should be not going bankrupt. That seems like a really positive value to have for a city. So I guess that's my thought, and I yield my time.
Thank you. And I'll go ahead and try the phone caller ending in 2009. If you can please state your name for the record, you'll have 2 minutes to speak. Phone number ending in 2009. Okay, move on to the next person, Christina B. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. You can go ahead and start.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Council Member, City Manager, and staff. My name is Christina Retzi, Richmond resident. I primarily want to give full support to our City Manager and staff. I completely agree with Council Member Bates that undermining our City Manager is absolutely not okay. Having Lift Up Richmond represent their membership as part of an open budget process seems fine, but to compare a special interest consortium like Lift Up Richmond to a professional consultancy retained by the city is just confusing and disingenuous. You may or may not like your professional consultancy. You may choose not to hire them again, but to compare them is just apples and oranges. What's also disingenuous is for Lift Up Richmond to claim they represent our city residents. They represent their membership, some of whom are residents, which is fine and as it should be, but they certainly don't represent residents in general. They can and should have their voice in this process, as should many other groups and residents. But I'm confused why they were asked to make a public presentation in this kind of forum. It puts this group above all the other interests in the city, residents, businesses, and it undermines our city manager and staff. So I hope the city develops a truly open, transparent, and collaborative process where the public is invited and encouraged to participate. And I also hope our city council can learn to provide more unified leadership moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last speaker is Alyssa Smith. Alyssa, you'll have 2 minutes to speak. You can go ahead and start.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. My name is Alyssa. I'm a Richmond resident. Since other people reading their planned speeches seem to think that this is important, I also use the library and I drive on the Richmond streets and, you know, all these other little talking points that make people sound good on a phone call. This meeting has been really incredible. We watched Lift Up Richmond present a plan that had no way to generate business revenue or encourage people to spend money in our city. Then we listened to the RPA read scripted commentary that they clearly planned with Lift Up Richmond. Then we listened to the RPA shit on city staff after giving them hardly any notice to present today. And now we get to all listen to all these people read their clearly scripted statements that they also wrote with Lift Up Richmond. I find it really interesting that when looking up Lift Up Richmond online, that some of their only online presence is a video of our own Gail McLaughlin promoting their Measure U, and that Lift Up Richmond includes members of the RPA. What's happening here is glaringly obvious. The RPA is trying to get their own people to determine the budget for our city, which I think is pretty disgusting. So all I have to say is that if and when you vote on this, I think every member of the RPA should recuse themselves from the vote as they have a clear conflict of interest. And them voting on this would be obviously them trying to influence their own city budget in a way that I think is probably illegal. So if you're going to vote on this ever, all 4 members of the RPA that are on our city council need to recuse themselves from this vote as, like I said, it's a conflict of interest. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll go ahead and try the phone caller ending in 2009. In order to unmute your phone, please press *9. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. Please state your name for the record. Phone number ending in, hello?
Hello?
Yes, I can hear
Hello?
you. Yes.
Okay, it was *6 and not *9. Okay, thank you. I really appreciate being able to speak to you. I'm a resident. I have been a resident since 1990, and I'm referring to your agenda item E1, and I want to quote, "A proposed project must improve the health of the community and natural environment, open space and land for preservation, habitat protection, and biological diversity." The proposed disc golf course at Hilltop Lake Park works against these environmental mandates. In fact, it has the potential to do great damage to this pristine 36-acre wildlife habitat and oasis, which the Parks and Rec Department has maintained beautifully for the 25 years I've been walking there. Destroying this natural park with its permanent family of deer who would have no other place to go, ducks, Canada geese, coots, buffleheads, etc., would set a very bad example for our youth. This park is now available to everyone to walk with their children, push their baby strollers, jog, even fish. The nearby Autism Foundation staff bring their autistic clients on walks there every day. These important users should not be driven out by the few who see the park not for the rare urban wildlife refuge that it is, but only as a place to compete in their dangerous game, in which players toss their small, sharp-edged discs at highway speeds of up to 70 miles per hour. Neither people nor animals can outrun them. The cities of Martinez and Pleasant Hill have rejected similar proposals for similar concerns. The planners failed to post a notice at the trailheads so that the park users could share their input. We only found out about it by accident on Friday, February 26th, when 4 of us were having a picnic at the lake. Mr. Scott Riley breezed by, told us they were going to put in a golf course, never mentioned the discs involved, and never came over to explain this to us or ask our opinions. The Hilltop Lake Park is a jewel for Richmond to be proud of, as it is. Let's not allow a few individuals to hijack it for a game that they can easily play on one of the many courses.
Time has expired. Thank you. And that was the last speaker.
Okay, thank you. So staff has heard a lot from the public, and they've heard from council members. I'm sure they've taken a lot of notes, and I would like to wind this meeting up if we can. I assume that somebody on this council wants to vote on these guidelines at some point in time, and you're welcome to put it on a future agenda if you want to do that. I don't think we have to debate that right now. Not that I would necessarily encourage it, but every city council member has a right to agendize something. So if that's what you want to do, just put it on the agenda and we'll deal with it when it comes up. So
and just a reminder that an option to offer to you all is to think about whether or not we want to go through, a process with mission, vision, and values, and have that be incorporated as part of that process. Or alternatively, if we really do want to adopt something right now, staff would recommend some additional analysis. I raised some concerns, including 1 or 2 things. Again, like I said, a lot of it would be really easy to incorporate, but there are some concerns about some specific things that we'd like to be able to analyze and share with you all.
Okay, Councilmember Bates.
I want to thank all the speakers who participated. But I want to remind this council that we had maybe 20, 25 speakers, plus the Lift Up Richmond presentation. And those combined represent a very small fraction of the total community of 100 and some thousand people. So be mindful that a large segment of the community that have no idea what we're speaking about, and to try to ram something down their throat, I think is ill-conceived. So I hope that we will have a greater degree of participation, discussion, transparency before we make any decision one way or the other. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'm inclined to adjourn this meeting if somebody else doesn't have anything else. So going once, going twice, thank you. We are adjourned. Councilor McLaughlin.
Yes, I have a report that I have to give, if that's okay, from Trina's, a request from Trina and our city council liaison. And I would like to, I'm sorry, this is moving so quickly. I would like to thank all the sponsors, and here it is, okay. We had a wonderful Sisters in Solidarity event this past Saturday, and I want to thank Trina Jackson for organizing the event, and all the planning committee for all their organizing work, and for all the people who participated. As Trina has asked me, I would like to also thank the sponsors who participated, and the main sponsor and host was the City of Richmond, of course, and the champion sponsors were Sims Metal Management, the Factory Bar, Richmond Neighborhood Housing Services, and M.A. Hayes Company. So thank you to all of them, and thank you to the Sisters in Solidarity Planning Committee. And again, it was a great event. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, if there's nothing else, then we are in fact adjourned. Have a good evening.
Happy Women's Month.
Thank you.
Night.